The trial happened in darkness, not metaphorical darkness, but the literal absence of dawn. The Sanhedrin convened before sunrise in violation of their own sacred law. They knew what they were doing, they knew the rules they were breaking, and they broke them anyway. Have you ever wondered why the most pivotal trial in human history was conducted in secret, rushed through the night like a crime? The Jewish trial of Jesus was not one trial, it was 6. 3 religious, 3 political. The Gospels record them with unsettling detail, each account adding fragments the others omit. But there's something the standard narratives miss, something buried in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, in texts the early church fathers whispered about but rarely quoted. The trial was illegal from the moment it began. Every procedure violated, every law of the Sanhedrin shattered. 71 judges, the most learned men in Jerusalem, conducting a trial that their own code declared null before a single word was spoken. They arrested him at night. The Mishnah explicitly forbids this. Capital cases must begin during daylight hours, never after sunset. They held the trial on Passover Eve, the most sacred night of the Jewish calendar. The law forbids capital proceedings on feast days or their eves. They sought false witnesses. Deuteronomy demands that judges pursue truth, not testimony that serves a verdict already decided. They struck the accused. The prisoner was hit in the face during questioning, a violation so severe that it should have dissolved the court immediately. And they delivered a guilty verdict on the first day. Jewish law required a night to pass before sentencing in capital cases, a mercy embedded in their justice system to prevent executions born from rage. The high priest that night was Caiaphas. His name means rock or depression, and history remembers him as the man who decided one must die so the nation could live. But what history often forgets is that Caiaphas was appointed by Rome. He was not elected by the priests or chosen by lot in the sacred manner. He was installed by Valerius Gratus, the prefect before Pilate, and served at the pleasure of the occupation. His legitimacy was political, not spiritual. The Sadducees controlled the temple, and the Sadducees did not believe in resurrection, angels, or spirits. They were the rationalists, the pragmatists, the collaborators. The charge was blasphemy. Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who would sit at the right hand of power. For this, they tore their garments. The high priest ripped his robes, a theatrical gesture that signaled unforgivable sacrilege. But here's what the ancient texts reveal that most sermons never mention. The charge of blasphemy under Jewish law required the accused to pronounce the divine name, the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters of God that could not be spoken. HWH. Jesus never said it. He called himself the Son of Man, a title from Daniel. He referenced Psalm 110, where David speaks of the Lord saying to my Lord. He used metaphor, scripture, and imagery, but he did not utter the forbidden name. So why was he condemned? The Babylonian Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, records another memory. It mentions a man named Yeshu, executed on the eve of Passover for sorcery and leading Israel astray. The passage is brief, almost dismissive. Some scholars deny it refers to Jesus at all. But the timing matches, the crime matches, and the method, hanging, was a euphemism in Jewish writing for crucifixion. The Talmud was written centuries later, compiled by rabbis who had no love for the Christian movement, that blamed them for the death of their God. And yet, even in their hostile witness, the illegality of the trial seeps through. The passage notes that for 40 days before execution, a herald was supposed to go out calling for witnesses in his defense. No such herald went out for Yeshu. The trial was rushed, the verdict predetermined. But the most chilling detail is not in the Talmud or the Gospels. It's in a text called the Gospel of Peter, a 2nd century fragment found in a monk's tomb in Egypt in 1886. The manuscript was banned by the early church, deemed too dangerous for public consumption. In it, the Jewish elders realized too late what they have done. After the crucifixion, after the tomb is sealed, after the Roman guards are posted, the text describes them paralyzed with fear. Not guilt, fear. They knew the prophecies, they knew the signs, and they knew they had just killed someone they should not have touched. The rabbis had a saying, "The Sanhedrin that executes one person in 70 years is called murderous." That night, they executed God. If you want to know what happened next, when the darkness became something worse than absence of light, follow us. The Romans didn't care about blasphemy. Pilate didn't wake up that morning worried about Jewish theology or messianic claims. Rome had seen 1,000 messiahs, 100 prophets, countless holy men who promised liberation and delivered only corpses. What Rome cared about was order. What Rome cared about was taxes. What Rome cared about was the appearance of control in a province that hated them with religious fervor. So when the Sanhedrin dragged Jesus to the praetorium at dawn, they changed the charge. Not blasphemy now, treason. He claims to be king of the Jews. He forbids paying taxes to Caesar. He stirs up the people. These were political crimes, Roman crimes, charges that demanded Roman attention. And Pilate, the prefect who history remembers as weak and vacillating, was anything but. Archaeological evidence, including an inscription found in Caesarea in 1961, confirms his title, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, not procurator as later texts softened it. Prefect, a military governor, a man who had already slaughtered Galileans in the temple, mixing their blood with their sacrifices. A man who had hung Roman shields with Caesar's image in Jerusalem, provoking riots he crushed with calculated brutality. This was not a man who agonized over justice for a Jewish peasant, so why did he hesitate? The Gospels say he found no fault in Jesus. 3 times he declared him innocent. He offered to release him under the Passover amnesty, a custom that let the crowd choose one prisoner to go free. He sent him to Herod Antipas, tetrarch of Galilee, hoping to shift responsibility. He had his wife send a message, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream." And finally, he washed his hands before the crowd, a gesture borrowed from Deuteronomy, declaring himself innocent of this man's blood. But here's what the Roman records suggest, what Tacitus and Josephus confirm in fragments. Pilate wasn't weak, he was political. He was walking a razor's edge between Jewish rebellion and Roman suspicion. Sejanus, his patron in Rome, had recently fallen from power, executed for treason. Pilate's position was suddenly vulnerable. Any hint of unrest in Judea, any report of a failed execution that sparked revolt, could end his career or his life. The Sanhedrin knew this. They weaponized it. If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. That phrase, Caesar's friend, was not casual. It was a technical term, a title of political alliance. To lose it meant disgrace, exile, or death. The Jewish leaders threatened Pilate with Rome itself, and so he broke. Not out of weakness, but calculation. Better one innocent man than his own head. The scourging happened next. Roman scourging was not a whip. It was a flagrum, leather straps embedded with bone, metal, and lead. The victim was stripped and tied to a post, bent forward so the back was exposed. The soldiers didn't count lashes. They flogged until they were tired or the condemned was unrecognizable. The flesh didn't just break. It tore away in strips, exposing muscle, sometimes bone. Men died from scourging alone, shock and blood loss taking them before they ever reached the cross. Ancient medical analysis suggests Jesus would have been in severe hypovolemic shock by the time they finished, his blood pressure collapsing, his heart racing to compensate for fluid loss it couldn't replace. Then they mocked him. The soldiers dressed him in a purple robe, a parody of royalty. They wove a crown from thorns, not the small decorative kind, but long, sharp thorns from a plant that grew wild in Jerusalem, possibly Ziziphus spina Christi. They pressed it into his skull. They put a reed in his hand as a scepter. They knelt before him, laughing, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him over and over, on the head, driving the thorns deeper. Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher contemporary to these events, described Roman soldiers in Judea as brutal, corrupt, and sadistic. They hated the Jews. They hated being stationed in a province where they couldn't even enter the temple without causing riots. And here was a Jew accused of claiming kingship, helpless before them. The mockery wasn't random cruelty. It was cultural rage, occupier against occupied, empire against the conquered. When they led him to Golgotha, the place of the skull, he couldn't carry the crossbeam. Simon of Cyrene was pulled from the crowd to carry it for him. The Gospels note this almost in passing, but it reveals the state Jesus was in. A healthy man could carry the patibulum, the 40-pound crossbeam. He had been awake for over 24 hours, beaten, scourged, and was now bleeding out internally and externally. His body was failing. Crucifixion was designed to maximize suffering while prolonging death. The condemned was nailed or tied to the cross, arms outstretched, feet fixed to the vertical beam. The position made breathing difficult. To inhale, you had to push up on your legs, pulling against the nails in your wrists, scraping your shredded back against the wood. To exhale, you slumped down, weight tearing at the wounds. Hours passed this way, sometimes days. Death came from asphyxiation, exhaustion, or shock. The Romans didn't invent crucifixion, but they perfected it. They used it for slaves, rebels, and anyone they wanted to make an example of. It was public executioner's terror, bodies left hanging as warnings. And they crucified him between two criminals, not beside them, between them. The Gospels call them thieves, but the Greek word is lestes, which means bandits, revolutionaries, insurgents. Barabbas, the man released instead of Jesus, was also a lestes, a rebel who had committed murder during an uprising. The two crucified with Jesus were likely his companions, part of the same failed revolt. Rome was crucifying revolutionaries that day, and they placed Jesus in the center, the King of the Jews, the leader of nothing, the prophet who wouldn't fight. Above his head, Pilate placed a sign, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests objected, "Don't write King of the Jews, write that he claimed to be King of the Jews." But Pilate refused. "What I have written, I have written." His only act of defiance, not for justice, for spite. The sky went dark at noon. For 3 hours, darkness covered the land. Scholars debate whether it was an eclipse, a storm, a sandstorm, or something else. But eclipses don't last 3 hours, and Passover falls on a full moon, when solar eclipses are astronomically impossible. Something else happened that day, something the ancients recorded and couldn't explain.